Hidden addictions, secret donations, and reading for Lord of the Rings. These are just some of the things these rock icons kept under wraps. In May 2017, Soundgarden played a show at Detroit's Fox Theater, during which singer Chris Cornell reportedly acted out of character. He was unsteady on his feet, lacking energy, and forgot lyrics. After the concert, Cornell retreated to his hotel room and called his wife Vicky. He was slurring his words, which scared her so much that she asked Soundgarden bodyguard Martin Kirsten to check on him. Kirsten broke down the doors to Cornell's hotel room and found him unresponsive, along with materials that suggested he'd attempted to take his own life. First responders couldn't revive him, and he was pronounced dead at age 51. While suicide was ruled the cause of death, it wasn't an overdose. A toxicology report determined that Cornell had taken therapeutic doses of various commonly prescribed medications. While the singer had dealt with substance abuse issues in the past, he had been sober for a long time. But when pain from a shoulder injury kept him from sleeping, he became dependent on a powerful sleep aid.
In retrospect, I've learned that it's not supposed to be given to anybody who's in recovery.
That medication, when combined with Cornell's other prescriptions, had altered his brain chemistry. Pathologist Dr. Richard Coate told ABC News, "What the two drugs did individually and in combination was to really impair his judgment and make him psychically unable to be responsive in ways that he normally would be responsive."
With the medications that were in his system that night, he did not have the mental capacity to decide to leave this world on his own.
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers embarked on their 40th anniversary tour in 2017, and while it would prove to be their last tour before Petty's death, it turns out that was probably going to be the case either way. His wife Dana told Billboard he'd had it in mind it was his last tour and he owed it to his longtime crew. Before the tour, Petty learned that he'd fractured his hip, which left him in excruciating pain during every show. Without treatment and with regular use, it had completely broken by his last performance. Petty had a hip replacement planned for after the tour, but decided to rest first. As Dana recalled, he was like, "I just got home. I want some time. I don't want to go to hip replacement surgery. I want to be home with my wife and dog." Petty quietly dealt with the pain by taking prescription-grade painkillers. Barely a week after his last show, he died of multiple organ failure caused by an accidental overdose of fentanyl, oxycodone, and other drugs. He was 66. On top of his pain and drug use, his family revealed in a statement that he'd also been dealing with knee problems and emphysema. Knowing he was struggling with all of this at the time makes the fact that he played over 40 shows in the months leading up to his death all the more impressive. Between his work with the Mothers of Invention and his prolific solo project, Frank Zappa made more than 60 albums. That career was cut short in December 1993 when he died of prostate cancer. Still, he went down in history as one of the most respected figures in rock. Zappa was one of the pickiest musicians out there, and he was as particular about where his music would go as he was about the parts he recorded for it. He packed his catalog into a sprawling underground complex full of thousands of hours worth of physical recordings, and hired archivist Joe Travers to oversee them. And as much as he cared about all those recordings, Zappa didn't want his wife to bear the burden of preserving them. Jill Christensen, manager of the Ric Ocasek record label that put out a string of Zappa CDs, told a fanzine in 1995, Frank wanted to sell the catalog as part of his estate planning. As I understand it, he wanted his wife Gail, who had run the business all these years, to have a nice life and not have to deal with all this business. Instead, Gail Zappa created the Zappa Family Trust and became extremely protective of her husband's music. She sued Ric Ocasek for its handling of post-mortem Zappa recordings and threatened legal action against Zappa cover bands and Zappa festivals. The Beatles were the most successful rock band of all time before they effectively broke up in 1970. For the next few decades, each individual Beatle embarked on prolific solo careers, but the full Fab Four would never work together again, at least not while they were all alive. Fans may have been hopeful that would change throughout the 70s, but John Lennon's death in 1980 ensured it never would. In 1994, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr agreed to participate in the Beatles Anthology, a multimedia collection of rare Beatles recordings and a documentary miniseries. Around then, the surviving Beatles wanted to record new material, but Lennon's absence made that feel impossible. That is, until Lennon's widow, Yoko Ono, handed off some homemade cassettes of demos Lennon had made in the late 70s. These tapes contained the songs Free as a Bird, which Lennon had planned to use in a musical he never finished, and Now and Then. Free as a Bird was rough, but McCartney, Harrison, and Starr worked their magic and tracked their own vocal and instrumental parts.
It was very strange when we started that there's only three of us, after all those years.
The single was released in late 1995. It was the first new Beatles song in 25 years, and it hit the top 6 in the US. Now and Then was too degraded to use in 1995, but by 2023, recording technology had advanced enough to make the demo workable. Though Harrison had died in 2001, McCartney and Starr contributed their own parts, and the final product came out in November 2023. It reached number 7 in the US and earned the Beatles a Grammy nomination for Record of the Year. Between 1967 and 2016, David Bowie released 26 studio albums, the last of which came out just days after he died from cancer. And while the fact that he had cancer at all wasn't public knowledge at the time, that's not the revelation we're focusing on today. Bowie pursued art in all different types of media, including film. He occasionally acted in projects that interested him, like The Man Who Fell to Earth, The Hunger, The Last Temptation of Christ, and Labyrinth. But Bowie was also considered for a part in one of the biggest film franchises ever, Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings. Dominic Monaghan, who played Merry in the trilogy, spotted Bowie in a casting office after one of his auditions. He recalled to HuffPost, "As I was reading a magazine waiting, David Bowie came in and signed his little list and went in, and I'm assuming he read for Gandalf. I can't think of anything else he would have read for." Jackson later confirmed that he sought Bowie out to play the pipe-smoking wizard, but the singer was too busy to take on the job. And as cool as it would have been to see the thin white duke play the tall white wizard, we can't imagine anyone but Sir Ian McKellen in the role now. Van Halen cycled through lineup changes more than a few times over the years. In 1985, Sammy Hagar replaced original singer David Lee Roth. He left the band in 1996 and returned for a reunion tour 8 years later, but that didn't go too well.
That reunion tour in 2004 was some of the most miserable, backstabbing, dark crap I've ever been involved with.
Despite being fed up with guitarist Eddie Van Halen's heavy drinking and unpredictable behavior, Hagar's contract prevented him from leaving the tour early. The tour's final show ended with Eddie drunkenly smashing his guitar and crying on stage. Hagar and Eddie never worked together between then and Eddie's death in October 2020, but Hagar went on to tell Howard Stern that he'd reconciled with his former bandmate in the months before his passing. In a note to Stern, he wrote, "Eddie and I have been texting, and it's been a love fest since we started communicating earlier this year. We both agreed not to tell anyone because of all the rumors it would stir up about a reunion." Sadly, bassist Michael Anthony couldn't say the same. In 2006, Van Halen fired Anthony and replaced him with Eddie's teenage son Wolfgang. In January 2021, Anthony told the Talkin' Rock with Meltdown podcast that he never reconnected with Eddie. He said, "We didn't get a chance to, and it kind of bothers me because we had some issues that were never resolved." Foo Fighters began with a 1995 studio project. When it became a real band, Dave Grohl, who'd initially played all the instruments, settled into guitar and vocals and hired Taylor Hawkins, then known for his work with Alanis Morissette, to step in on drums. In 2022, Foo Fighters headed out on a world tour. An hour before their show in Bogota, Colombia, Hawkins was found unresponsive in his hotel room. Paramedics were unable to revive him, and he died at the age of 50. A toxicology report discovered 10 drugs in his body. Authorities determined that Hawkins' heart was twice the normal weight, and ultimately failed due to a combination of heroin and the other drugs in his system. At the time, the other Foo Fighters believed that Hawkins had been clean for years. An early 2000s overdose had placed him into a coma. Hawkins had even told Kerrang that he kicked the drug in favor of mountain biking. As Hawkins' drum tech, Chad Ward, told Rolling Stone, he never wanted Dave to worry about that again. Hawkins' other health issues hadn't previously been a matter of public record. 3 months before he died, Hawkins fell unconscious during a flight and needed medical attention. Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer Chad Smith believed he was considering a diminished role in Foo Fighters. He recalled Hawkins telling him, "I can't do it like this anymore." Ronnie James Dio's name was synonymous with heavy metal in the 70s and 80s. His simultaneously operatic and snarling vocals fueled headbanging bands like Elf, Rainbow, and the eponymous Dio. He even replaced Ozzy Osbourne in the pioneer metal band Black Sabbath. But possibly his biggest contribution to the metal genre was that he introduced the devil horns hand gesture to rock. Dio's public persona was mysterious and menacing, and he usually let his epic fantasy-driven music speak for itself. But behind the scenes, Dio was downright sweet and sentimental. He must have gotten all his aggression out on stage.
People have their own perception of you. There's nothing I can change about that.
In November 2009, his manager and wife, Wendy Dio, announced that he'd entered an aggressive treatment program for stomach cancer. Less than 6 months later, he died at age 67. While Dio received treatment, he called one of his favorite producers to record a final song. But rather than a sweeping metal epic, Dio opted for a gentle piano ballad called This Is Your Life. It would be the final track on a 2014 tribute album made in his honor. Heroin factors largely into Alice in Chains' legacy. The band's first bassist, Mike Starr, died of an overdose in 2011, and he wasn't the first band member to succumb to addiction. Lead singer Layne Staley's struggles with addiction featured prominently in his lyrics, and were evident to those who knew him best. It's widely believed he was high when Alice in Chains recorded their episode of MTV Unplugged in 1996. By 1998, his frequent drug use had led to a noticeable physical deterioration. In April 2002, Staley's accountants noticed his banking accounts had gone untouched for weeks. weeks. He reached out to Staley's mother, who helped the police perform a wellness check at his Seattle home. They found Staley's body surrounded by drug paraphernalia, and an autopsy confirmed he died of an overdose 2 weeks earlier. It wasn't until after Staley's death, though, that the public learned just how deep in the throes of addiction he was. According to his mother, he had gone to rehab 10 times, and he'd overdosed to the point where his heart stopped on 5 separate occasions. The only reason he survived those overdoses was that others were around to help. Sadly, he was alone in his home for the one that finally took his life. After ditching Black Sabbath for a successful solo career, Ozzy Osbourne assembled a backing band to record his 1980 album Blizzard of Oz. Possibly the most celebrated musician of that group was Randy Rhoads, whose classical-informed precision and fast shredding made him a top-tier metal guitarist in the 80s. Sadly, Rhoads' brief career in life came to an end in March 1982. While traveling with the band, Rhoads and the group's seamstress boarded a small plane that the pilot proceeded to fly around their tour bus. Sadly, the pilot hit the bus, lost control, and crashed into a nearby house. All 3 people on board died, including a 25-year-old Rhoads. The musician died before he could make some pretty drastic career changes. After he declined an assignment to record an album of Black Sabbath songs, Osbourne fired, then rehired Rhoads. Bandmate Rudy Sarzo told bass player, ultimately he agreed to do it and do one more tour, but it never happened because he passed away. After his obligations were fulfilled, Rhoads planned to leave the rock scene altogether in pursuit of a master's in classical guitar. Joy Division's haunting, synth-driven songs took rock to new dark places that continue to inspire alternative rock bands to this day. Singer and guitarist Ian Curtis wrote vividly about pain and death, but it wasn't until after he was gone that his bandmates fully understood how personal those lyrics were. Drummer Stephen Morris told CNN, "Ian's lyrics were great. You were very lucky to have someone who wrote such fantastic lyrics, but we thought, that's really clever, he's writing about somebody else. And then after his death, you look at it and think, oh, it was all about him."
He was delving deep within himself. And occasionally, some of the songs sounded quite frighteningly real.
Joy Division got popular in the UK through touring and the release of their seminal album Unknown Pleasures. They planned to leave for an American tour in May 1980, but it would never come to pass. In the weeks leading up to the trip, the band recorded the LP Closer, and they started to sense that Curtis was spiraling. Guitarist Bernard Sumner told CNN, "We wrote 2 songs, I think, 2 weeks before Ian died to try and heal him through music." He noted that the uplifting track Ceremony was written to try to remind Curtis of all the good things he and the band had coming. But the day before Joy Division was supposed to leave, Curtis took his own life. He was just 23. The surviving members went on to form New Order, and Ceremony would be their first release. In September 2019, Cars frontman Ric Ocasek died at 75 from heart disease and pulmonary emphysema. A year later, his son Christopher posted a photo to Instagram of himself, his father, and his brother Adam. He captioned it, "You don't exist. We didn't either," along with some harsh hashtags like "My father died twice," "Throwaway kids," and "Deadbeat dad." Apparently, Ocasek hadn't had much of a relationship with his 2 eldest sons. Christopher told Page 6, "My father in essence died the day I was born. He was never present. He was never there. I was living a few blocks from him for a year or 2 and saw him once maybe." Ocasek filed to divorce Christopher's mother in 1971 while she was pregnant with Adam. He quickly married Suzanne Ocasek, whom he left in 1988 after meeting model Paulina Poroskova during production of the Cars video Drive. 30 years later, the pair separated but continued to live together in New York City. Poroskova was actually the one to find Ocasek dead, but when his will was unsealed, she learned that she'd been left out. Ocasek wrote, "I have made no provision for my wife Paulina Poroskova, Paulina, as we are in the process of divorcing. She has abandoned me." Neither Christopher nor Adam were included in the disbursement either. Formed in the early 80s, the metal band Pantera was comprised of singer Phil Anselmo, bassist Rex Brown, drummer Vinnie Paul, and guitarist Dimebag Darrell Abbott. Pantera became unlikely mainstream stars in the early 90s with the #1 album Far Beyond Driven, but personal issues began to come between Anselmo and the rest of the group. The band slowly broke up in the 2000s, and Abbott was the only reason it even lasted that long. Brown told the Dallas Observer in 2016, "The strongest one of us all was Dime, and he kept the peace between all of us. He had this way about him, and he could get away with all kinds of shit. He lit people up just by being nice to them." Brothers Abbott and Paul went on to start a new band, Damage Plan, but when the band was performing in Columbus, Ohio in December 2004, a man opened fire in the venue. He killed 4 people, including a 38-year-old Abbott. Anselmo attempted to attend the funeral, but Abbott's partner warned him not to come. Apparently, Abbott had reached out to him repeatedly before his death, but Anselmo never answered.
I instantly just said, "Why are you calling now?" And of course I started to cry. "Why didn't you return the 9 phone calls when Darrell called you?"
Wham singer George Michael's life ended on Christmas Day in 2016. Michael's body was discovered in bed by his partner, and an autopsy showed that he died at the age of 53 from natural causes, specifically issues with his heart and liver. In the final years of his life, Michael had largely stopped making music and retreated from the public eye. He was so private that he managed to donate hundreds of thousands of pounds to charity without the media finding out. But within hours after news broke of his death, people and organizations came forward to celebrate the singer for his generosity. Michael had secretly funneled all royalties from his 1991 Elton John duet Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me to the HIV-fighting charity Terrence Higgins. Similarly, the proceeds from 1996's Jesus to a Child went to Childline, along with millions more he'd given the organization over the years.
His gift has helped hundreds of thousands of children.
And that's not even close to the end of the list. UK DJ Mick Brown revealed that Michael donated £100,000 every year to his radio station's Easter charity drive. TV producer Richard Osman tweeted that, after a Deal or No Deal contestant said she'd used her winnings for IVF, he called in and paid her bills in advance. And it wasn't all media related either. After overhearing a complete stranger crying about her mounting debt, Michael wrote her a £25,000 check before leaving the restaurant they were in. In 1995, 4 months after the death of frontman Jerry Garcia, the surviving members of the Grateful Dead decided to break up. The band had spent more than 30 years together spearheading the jam band scene, but they didn't exactly go their separate ways after that. Bassist Phil Lesh went on to frequently play with his former bandmates in other projects, like the Other Ones and the Dead, and he brought them into his own project, Phil Lesh and Friends. In 2025, the Grateful Dead would have celebrated the 60th anniversary of the band's formation. Secret plans were underway by the group's 4 main original members, Bob Weir, Bill Kreutzmann, Mickey Hart, and Phil Lesh, to fully reunite for a series of shows. Weir told CBS Mornings, "We were kicking it around. In fact, we were going to get together and kick some songs around tomorrow." Unfortunately, the 84-year-old Lesh died just a few days before that interview, so that reunion will never come to be. Kreutzmann added, "I was hoping that we could play with him again one more time." If you can say one thing about Prince, it's that he had a sound all his own. The soul singer, dancer, songwriter, producer, and multi-instrumentalist topped the charts over and over in the 80s and 90s with classics like Let's Go Crazy, When Doves Cry, and The Most Beautiful Girl in the World. In April 2016, just after completing his solo Piano and a Microphone tour, Prince was found dead in an elevator at his Paisley Park complex in Minneapolis. He was 57. He died from an accidental overdose of fentanyl. Reportedly, he had over 6 times the fatal dosage in his system. Until then, Prince's dependency on painkillers was unknown to the world. Apparently, decades of performing intricate dance moves had put such a strain on his body that he underwent joint replacement surgery in 2010. He began using prescription painkillers to self-medicate and developed an addiction. A week before his death, Prince's plane made an emergency landing for medical treatment when he overdosed on a flight. At the time, the media was told that Prince had become severely dehydrated. The Michael Jackson 30th anniversary special was one of the last major show business events to take place in New York City before the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. Held at Madison Square Garden on September 7th and September 10th, it commemorated 3 decades of the genre-blending king of pop's career, and saw major acts of rock and pop honor Jackson by performing his biggest hits. On the morning after the second concert, Jackson actually had a meeting scheduled in an office in the World Trade Center, but after staying up talking to his mother and sister the night before, he decided to skip it and sleep in. Had he gotten up on time, he likely would have been in one of the towers when they fell. His brother Jermaine Jackson wrote in his book, You Are Not Alone, "Thankfully, none of us had a clue that Michael was due at a meeting that morning at the top of one of the Twin Towers. We only discovered this when Mother phoned his hotel to make sure he was okay." When Freddie Mercury died from AIDS complications in November 1991, the general public had only learned he was sick the day before. And while that may seem like common knowledge now, the fact that he continued making music well into his final years came as a surprise to many. After Queen's 1991 album Innuendo was finished, Mercury retreated to the Lake Geneva area of Switzerland to write and record vocal tracks for his bandmates to record over later. One of Mercury's final works was A Winter's Tale, a bittersweet solo composition about a dying man looking back on his life. Mercury's final vocal work was on Mother Love, which he wrote with Queen guitarist Brian May. Sadly, he was too sick to record the last verse, so May stepped in. In 1995, Queen's album Made in Heaven was finally released. Eager Mercury fans did right by the late singer and sent A Winter's Tale into the top 10 of the UK pop charts. It's a tale as old as rock itself. Rock stars rejecting traditional relationships in favor of romancing as many women as often as possible. As cliché as it is, even seminal figures like Jimi Hendrix fell squarely into that category, and he often pursued multiple women at the same time. Though the world didn't know it at the time, that behavior might have left Hendrix a father by the time he died in 1970. In 1966, 23-year-old Hendrix lived with 16-year-old Diane Carpenter, and she gave birth to a daughter in February 1967. Hendrix refused to confirm or deny paternity paternity, but was actually in the process of arranging a blood test in 1970. He died before it could take place. In October 1969, James Sundquist was born, reportedly after an affair Hendrix had with his mother in Sweden. Sundquist later changed his name to Jimi Hendrix Jr. and sued to be included in the musician's estate in 1994.